In this video, we are going to be discussing the great sage of the Talmud, Rabba. Um, just to be clear, Rabba is not the same person as Rava, which we'll be discussing in a coming video, God willing. Rabba is spelled Resh Beis Hey, I'm sorry, and Rava, who is a later sage, is spelled Resh Vez Aleph. And so Rabba is with the Hey, it's with a Beis with a dot, and so it is pronounced Rabba versus Rava is pronounced with an aleph and is pronounced with a vase in the Ashkenazi pronouncing. Okay, so Rabba, his father's name was Nachmani. So Rabba bar Nachmani, he's known generally as Rabba. He had a brother who was uh, a student in the land of Israel, and he sent the message to his younger brother, and he said, "Why don't you come to the land of Israel?" And instead of he was born in Babylon. Why don't you come to the land of Israel and you could study under the great sage Rabbi Yochanan, or you'll have a teacher. However, it is not clear whether there is some evidence that suggests maybe he did, but it is not clear whether or not Rabba actually did go to the land of Israel to study under Rabbi Yochanan. However, he was a student of Rabbi Yehuda and in this Yeshiva of Pumpedisa. And the story goes, and we discussed this in a previous video when I talked about Rav Yosef, that after the passing of Rabbi Yehuda, there was a discussion who should be the Rosh Yeshiva. Should it be Rabah or should it be Rav Yosef? Rabbah was known as Oiker Harim, which means a uproot of mountains. We'll discuss what that means in a second. And Rav Yosef was known as Sinai, which meaning Mount Sinai. Rav Yosef was called Sinai because he had the tradition from Sinai. He had the tradition of all the different, teachings and traditions and brisos, which means things were not codified in the Mishnah, which are important to understand the Mishnah. And he had all these teachings and traditions. And Rabbah was known as Ikar Harim, which means an uprooter of mountains. We could translate it in English. I had some feedback from last time how we translated it, but basically someone who could take apart any argument, which basically means total logical dominance, which means so it wasn't about necessarily, not that Rabbah didn't know the traditions, but it wasn't his expertise. Expertise was he could take something and logically analyze it and totally uproot everything and get to the bottom of every single thing. And so total tear apart any argument. I think that's the way I'm going to translate it. So they decided who should be the Rosh Yeshiva, who should be the head of the academy. Should it be Rabba, who was this great analytical mind, or should it be Rav Yosef, who was this great um, uh, uh, master of the tradition? So they sent a message to the land of Israel. They said, what is better, Sinai or Oika Harim? Is it the person with the tradition or the analytical mind who could tear apart any argument? So they answered that Sinai Adif. Sinai is better. However, Rav Yosef refused to take upon himself to be the Rosh Yeshiva. He had a tradition from a stargazer or something of that effect that he would pass away 2 years after he became the Rosh Yeshiva, which ended up happening, as we discussed in the video of Rav Yosef. And instead, Rabba became the Rosh Yeshiva. And Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva for 22 years. And eventually, after his passing, he became the Rabba became the Rosh Yeshiva became Rav Yosef. He took over. However, during that time that Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva, even though again, like we said, technically Rav Yosef could have become the Rosh Yeshiva. During that time that Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yosef put himself as the uh, uh, you know nullified his opinion to the opinion of Rabba, and therefore totally subjugate himself to Rabba. And in fact, in their debates, there is only 2 debates that that Rav Yosef won over Rabba. That the halacha does not follow Rabba, but majority of the debates, Rabba being the halacha follows him, except for those 2 exceptions. In his days, the Rabba was the Rosh Yeshiva. Pumpedisa was at its peak. In the Yarche Kala, which was the months of the year that were preceding major agricultural seasons, which in Babylon was Adar and Elul, because in Nisan and Tishrei, those months were obviously Nisan is the planting, and in the Tishrei is the harvest. And so those months were the most needed to be in the field. So in preparation for that, where many students who would be away, because again, in an agricultural dominant economy, they would all gather in the yeshiva and in the academies, and for these 2 months. And this was considered the peak time of the yeshiva system of Babylon. And uh, during this time, it says that there were over 1,200 students in the academy. So that is obviously a tremendous, number, um, for yeshiva to be busy during these 2 months. So this was the peak time. Rabba also changed a little bit from Rav Yehuda. We discussed Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said that the main study of our times, meaning the times that are post the temple period, is where many laws, such as laws of purity, etc., are no longer practiced. He said that the main laws of our time are financial law. However, Rabbah took a little bit of a different approach, and he said that that besides that, we also have to know everything. So he engaged in halacha of all areas, and he said that he was the foremost expert in the laws of megaim, the laws of blemishes on a person's body, and the laws of ohalos, which is the laws that pertain to uh, what kind of structure will transmit a ritual impurity. So he was one of the experts in this. He was also a descendant of Eli HaKohen. Eli HaKohen is discussed in the book of Samuel as the Kohen Gadol at that time and his family. If you look in the book of Shmuel Aleph, it discusses that Eli's family was cursed, that nobody would live a long life, and Rabbah was a descendant of that family, and he actually, according to many opinions, he only lived till the age of 40, which means he would have been 22 years. He was the Rosh Yeshiva from the year 299 to the year 320. That would mean that he became the Rosh Yeshiva at 18. So he must have been a pretty big personality, even at a very, very young age. He was very poor, in contrast to his colleague Rav Chizda. We discussed in a previous video. The expression was that in the house of Rav Chizda they would feed white flour even to the animals, but in the house of Rabbah there wasn't even barley bread available for the people. So he lived a very tough life, um, and he was also critical of the people of Pumbedisa. And because he was critical of the people of Pumbedisa, they did not like him, and they eventually decided to tell the government that he was doing illegal things. What was the illegal thing that he was doing? They said that because during the Yarche Kala seasons, which we discussed in the beginning of the video, where during these peak seasons before the agricultural peak seasons, there would be 1,200 students. They said that these 1,200 students are avoiding taxes by coming for 2 months. So for 2 months a year, they're not paying taxes in the city of Pumbedisa. So therefore, they said that he was basically this big tax dodger, essentially. And he actually had to run for his life, and he ended up passing away in hiding in a city in that area of Babylon, near the city of Pumbedisa. The during his time, the Talmud recalls, I should say, that there was actually a spiritual idea behind this as well. That there was a debate in again, what this means exactly. It's a very spiritual idea, but basically there was a debate between Hakadosh Baruch Hu, between God Almighty, the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Heavenly Academy about a certain thing, whether it was pure or impure. The Heavenly Academy said it was impure. God Almighty said that it's pure. So they said, who's going to be the one who's going to decide between God Himself and the Heavenly Academy? So they said, we're going to ask Rabah. Rabah is the one who can be the third opinion, who's going to deciding opinion. And when he passed away, he said tahar tahar. He said pure pure, and that was the last words that he said. And a voice came from heaven and said, Rabbah's body was pure, and his passing of his soul was also impurity. And later, a note fell from heaven and said, Rabah has been summoned to the Heavenly Academy, essentially referring to the story that Rabah was summoned to because they needed his expertise in 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 uh, in the Heavenly Academy. He we'll say a few stories, a few sayings from him. Um, so one of the things that was unique about Rabbah's teaching style was he would always start off with a joke. He would start off with a joke, and then the entire academy would get serious and they would study Torah. Um, the other thing that was said about him that, or he would say essentially, was that we could see from Rabbah that even though he lived a very pious life, we could see that financial success is not necessarily tied to a person's piety, but is dependent on luck, mazel, however you want to translate that. So those are some sayings about from Rabbah. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, something I should have said, could have said, put them in the comments. We love feedback, and we'll see you in the next video.